Welcome to Free Friday Frights. It is a little after 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a Friday evening, and so for that reason, and because I was in Sudbury, Ontario, my hometown last week, or Quebec, Ontario, but I was in Sudbury, and I got this wonderful, I'm not sure where the light's coming in, you can see this is a Pepper's beer, I should say, which is a beer that's used in the TV show Letterkenny, and it's from Stack Brewing in Sudbury, Ontario. So I thought I would start this off by bringing in the weekend with a celebratory beer. This is a premium lager from a fantastic brewer in Sudbury, Ontario. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be reading a very brief horror story. Now, for the faint of heart, this is a little bit more disturbing. It's a little bit more macabre, and it's a story entitled Nervous Twitching. So it's a little bit surreal, a little bit disturbing. But fortunately, if you're squeamish, it's very, very short. And so I'm actually going to read the original version, which was published in a magazine that I'll talk about after I do the short reading. Nervous Twitching by Mark Leslie. The night was cold and the air murky. Samantha's blood was dark and still warm as it poured out onto the cold pavement from beneath her shoulder blades. Neil Hunter was afraid. Sort of. He couldn't quite remember what had happened. Here, it's heavy. It takes 2 hands just to lift it. But the results were plainly obvious. Samantha was now dead. Sort of. Relax. Hold it down. Expose the neck. That's it. Good, Neil. Good boy. Samantha's head rested on the alley floor about 2 feet away from her body. Burning tears welled in Neil's eyes. What had happened to her? And why couldn't he remember it? Well, he could remember it. Sort of. Good, son. Don't lose your grip. Lift the axe. Aim and drop quickly. He remembered seeing her head rolling away from her body and hearing the echoes of her screams bouncing off the alley walls. Something else echoed there, too. Laughter? Look at them fluttering helplessly about the yard. It's funny, but it's not funny. It's somehow pitiful. And the worst thing is that I can't help but laugh. Neil bowed over and released the contents of his stomach onto the cold pavement beside the fresh crimson liquid pooling onto the alley floor. Beside him, her headless body twitched. He looked up at the decapitated head through a blur of tears. Help me, her lips seemed to say as her mouth moved. Dad, they won't stop running around. Do they even know they're dead? And her eyes, they were vacant and staring, sort of. For sometimes her eyes seemed to move, seemed to be following his movements. It's nervous twitching, Neil. They'll stop. Funny how they flutter about even after death, isn't it? But we both know that it's really just nervous twitching, nothing more. Neil knelt by Samantha's head, the taste of bile still strong in his throat. Although his stomach continued to churn and his heart continued to ache, he could no longer throw up or cry. He was beyond all that. Sort of. Nothing more than nervous twitching. Keep watching, son. They'll stop. Shivering in the cool night air, he picked up her head, the left cheek matted with blood, now cold, and cradled it in his arms. He could feel her lips working against his chest. Sort of funny how they twitch, but they're not stopping, Dad. They're not stopping. And so that's the story, Nervous Twitching. So a very disturbing, surreal story. And it first was published in the fall of 1996 in a NorthWords Magazine. There it is. It was a special horror issue. It was reprinted in 2004 in my collection, One Hand Screaming. And the story itself, if you didn't pick up on the reference, was the old legend that, you've heard the expression probably, chicken running around with its head cut off. And if anyone's ever witnessed that, they don't often run, although that can happen. But what happens is when you cut the head off of a chicken, the nerves are still moving and there's still blood pumping. And so there's still this nervous twitching that's happening in the chickens. And so I imagined, having grown up in Northern Ontario, again, and that's why I have my fun beer from Northern Ontario, you witness that. I didn't grow up on a farm, but growing up on a farm, maybe you witness your dad chopping the heads off chickens. I witnessed my dad gutting deer or moose or cleaning the meat that we would later eat. And so I'd always wondered about what effect witnessing such disturbing things might have on a child. And so Neil has sort of lost control of what he's doing. He's lost control of time and space, and he's a man now with his love, and something bad has happened, and he's not sure what happened, but he's flashing back to this traumatic childhood experience with the chickens and cutting their heads off, and Dad, sort of laughing, and then Neil freaking out because they just don't stop. And I kind of paralleled that with his lover Samantha and her body not stopping. There's no real motivation in terms of the story. I don't really develop the characters of Neil or Samantha. I just imagined the scene, and again, it was a one-page story. Not even sure of the word count. Maybe it was 800 words or something like that. The whole idea was I just wanted to paint this picture, and I had an image of what if the chickens didn't stop, and then somehow tied that into this really bizarre, twisted scene. And in the original, where it was published in the original anthology, it's the introduction from the editor was, what better way is there to launch the new emphasis on horror than the use of one of Ottawa's purveyors of horror stories. I was living in Ottawa at the time, Mark Leslie. We feature a short story of his nervous twitching, and then a series of dark horror poems that were also published in this. If you have never read this sort of poetry before, be prepared for something totally different. A word to the squeamish, this is not for the faint of heart. It is horror, pure and simple. So that was kind of the introduction for it. And then I had actually a few of my dark poetry that appeared on the following pages with some really great art by artist Kathy Boubarouz and Ron Sutton that accompanied that. Again, that was Nervous Twitching, just a more of an experimental piece for me, really. I was, again, wanting to just play with the concept and wanting to try to, instead of tell a story about some in-depth characters, because there's really just this vagueness of this trauma that he had suffered, that Neil had suffered as a child, and the vagueness of what happened. But I wanted to try and paint a disturbing picture with as few words as possible, and so that was an experiment. It's a strange one, obviously, and not really a full fleshed out story, more of a vignette. But again, just an example of some of the disturbing things that can come from this boy's mind. So that was this week's Free Friday Frights, a very short one. I'm hoping that you are having a fantastic Friday, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I'm going to enjoy again this wonderful Pepper's beer from the TV show Letterkenny from Stack Brewing, and enjoy the rest of my weekend as well, probably with a few more beers from some similar great breweries that are in Northern Ontario. So thanks for hanging out with me on this Friday evening. Again, this is Mark Leslie with Free Friday Frights, and you just heard Nervous Twitching. Have a great weekend.